Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on everything you need to know about San Antonio politics. My name is Greg Jefferson. I'm Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express-News. I'm joined today by our transportation reporter, Richard Webner, and Harley Hubbard, the project manager for, this is going to be a long one.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Here we go. Project manager for the Bike Network Plan.
On the nose. Perfect.
In the city's transportation department. How's
yes,
that? Right?
5 stars. That's
right.
it.
Great. Excellent. So last week, the city council approved by a vote of 10-0 a sprawling new bike network plan that entails about 1,890 miles of new bike routes, and it's over 1,000 individual projects. Let's start at the beginning. How did this plan, 104 pages of it, how did it get started?
Well, it really got started in 2011 when the city did the first bike master plan. There were some kind of legislative documents earlier in the 90s and in the 70s about biking in San Antonio, but 2011 was really the benchmark. That's when bike facilities became part of the city's comprehensive master plan. So that's really when it started. And that was a great plan, set us off on the right foot. But when you do big planning efforts like that, it's kind of just intrinsically as part of the game, they have to get updated every so often. And especially when it comes to how we use our streets and how we use our land, best practices change so quickly. So since 2011, a lot has changed. A lot of how we use San Antonio has changed. A lot about San Antonio has changed. How many people are here, how they get around, where they're going. So it really was just time for an update. On top of that, safety has really become a top concern for cyclists in San Antonio. San Antonio is the 16th deadliest city for cyclists. We have a lot of people who rely on their bikes to get around, not just by choice. 200,000 people in San Antonio don't have access to a vehicle, and they still have places to go. So we want to make sure that they are safe as they commute for recreation, go to the doctor, go to the school, things like that. So we have proposed a complete network of about 1,800 miles to ensure that connectivity. And then we have an additional document that provides guidelines on safe infrastructure for those roadways.
So this built on a 2011 plan.
Yes.
What came out of that plan? What is different now in terms of biking lanes in San Antonio that wasn't there before that?
Yeah, so there's some best practices for bike facilities. And I say bike facilities because if I say bike lanes to planners and transportation people, a bike lane means something specific. A bike lane is just a painted line on a road. A bike facility is anything from that painted line to a protected line to something separated. It kind of is the big word. So bike facilities. Back in 2011, a extra wide shoulder, so maybe on like an access road of 1604, was considered an adequate bike lane. And that's not the case anymore. We have national guidance from organizations that show that that's just not safe, especially based on the speeds that those vehicles are going. So that's one thing that's changed, is just how we design for safety. Another thing that's changed is if you look at the 2011 bike plan, it's very prescriptive, and it's kind of like a snapshot of what San Antonio was in that moment. So it says, on this street, from this point to this point, this is the facility it needs. But then, maybe a few years pass, maybe instead of something that's heavily residential, there's been some change, there's been some development, maybe there's a school, maybe there's more shopping. So maybe that, prescription doesn't work anymore. So what we've done in our update to the plan is we've provided guidelines based on the land use context, the speed, and the volume of vehicles. The volume is just how many vehicles go by a day. The land use context is just like, what is the street like? What are we using it for? So as the street changes, the guidance is still applicable. So those are two of the biggest things that we've made sure to keep updated. In the 2011 plan, over 40% of those Tier 1 projects had some sort of construction done. So that's actually very good for a plan of that scale and for the city's kind of first endeavor into that. We're hoping to get more done more quickly with this 2025 plan.
Now, how did these projects come about? What did get accomplished out of the 2011 plan? Were those bond projects? Were those projects funded through the general fund?
Yes.
The annual general?
Yeah, it's a hodgepodge.
Okay. So all those.
Yeah, all of the above. It's a hodgepodge, and it'll be the same with this plan. So some of it will come straight from what we call bike facilities funding, which is a small pot of funding, which is specifically for bike projects. But the way the majority of this gets implemented is through roadway reconstruction projects. So if you go through the city's budget and the city's general fund, the number next to bike facilities is relatively small, but the number next to roadway is really big. And because bikes are part of the roadway, whenever Public Works goes and repairs or totally redesigns these roadways, the bike infrastructure will be included in that as well. And then, of course, we also have the bond. We know in this recent bond, we had a $10 million bike bond that will fund these projects. And then also some local, state, federal grants. So it's really a mix.
Okay.
I'm curious, have you studied the projects that were built as a result of the 2011 plan? Have you studied how much they're used?
We have occasionally. It's kind of hard to get an accurate count on how many cyclists are in San Antonio just because, you don't have to register, you don't have to get insurance. But the Texas Transportation Institute out of Texas A&M University has a great portal for sharing bike counts from all sorts of entities that collect those throughout the state. So we do have access to some of that information. Mm-hmm. And I could not give you a number off the top of my head for any of those right now.
And could you describe the process of putting together this most recent plan, like how many years you've been working on it? And were you brought into the city specifically to work on it?
No, I worked for the city for just over 6 years now. I first worked with animal care services for a little bit, and then I went to aviation and caught the transportation bug and did transportation work and sustainability for a little bit. But I've been in the transportation department for 2 years, and part of my job was administering the bike network plan. So it has been a 2-year effort to develop the network of where we need to go and where we'd like to go. First of all, we kind of collected information on our existing infrastructure and where you could get from that. But it was really 2 years of community working and community feedback. We had 3 phases of engagement to learn what people's experience was like and what they wanted their biking experience to be like. And then we also had stakeholder groups for, people within the city, meaning like city professionals, our partners and other agencies like VIA and the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And then also some niche groups that might have other concerns that we wouldn't have heard otherwise. So those are developers, schools, people with disabilities, things like that. So it was really just constantly talking to people. And almost every time we put a line on the map, kind of showing it around and saying, is this right? What are we missing? And doing that over and over and really being open to those conversations and it being malleable until like the very last second. But even now it can change. So as things go into the future, the bike plan can be amended. So it's a living document.
From the city standpoint, is this plan, is this a way of saying we have so many bicyclists in San Antonio that, these are totally warranted by existing demand? Or is the idea that, if we make, 1,890 miles of new bike routes, that will encourage people to get out of their cars and bike?
I think, first of all, it's a recognition that cyclists and vulnerable road users deserve safety just as much as motorists. I think that is the first step, is recognizing that we have people that use these facilities. They have rights to the road, and they deserve to be safe as we're moving around. The Transportation Department houses the city's Vision Zero program. Vision Zero is a program to eliminate all traffic fatalities, so not just motorists, but pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, hoverboards, whatever you could come, small things with wheels, anything you could come up with. So that is kind of our guidepost for everything. And then everything else is kind of just a positive side effect of it. Like, yes, we would like to reduce congestion by making it easier for people to choose to bike for people who want to. Yes, we want to improve public health by increasing access to biking. Yes, we want to improve air quality and our climate by increasing access to biking. But the safety and the right of people to use the roadway is really number one.
Right. Now, the price tag for this is pretty remarkable. Just given it's the span of it, it's from $3 billion all told to maybe as much as $8 billion. First of all, why such a big range?
Yeah, so the $3 billion to $8 billion is kind of like a mislabel for how much it could cost. It's really, if we were to build everything right now and not include it into other roadway projects, literally just stop all work in the city and only do bike work, it would cost about $3 billion. Because things take time and because of inflation and because of work, depending on how long it takes, we project that it could cost as much to $8 billion to do everything individually. But that's not reality. That's not how this actually rolls out. Similar to the 2011 plan, similar to how I said earlier, these get rolled into bond projects. These get rolled into sidewalk improvements. These get rolled into roadway projects. And so it's not an additional $3 to $8 billion in the existing city budget.
So when we take a bond project, for example, are you talking about bond projects that are specifically to install these bike facilities, or is this part of a bigger road project?
Both. So there's two ways. There's a few ways that this could happen. So you could have a roadway that the roadway is nice, but we have some existing right-of-way that's easy to access, which just means we have some space on the sides. We're going to go ahead and just add on an existing bike facility. That could be a bond project. It probably wouldn't, because that's kind of just In the grand scheme of city projects, that's a small scale project. That could just be a bike facilities project. But when we go in and completely rebuild these roadways, when I mean like we are going down to the dirt, we're restriping, we're leveling things out, and we're, maybe even messing with signals and stuff like that, those big roadway projects will include bike facility improvements as well if they are called for in the bike plan for that roadway. So that'll just be, X road improvement project, and you'll see sidewalks, utilities, grading, bikes as one of those things that's getting done as part of that project.
Could you describe what this network might be like when it's fully realized?
Oh gosh, it'll be great. It'll be fantastic. That's really it.
So a little more detail.
Well, really, I can tell you a little bit about the goals of the network. The goal is for people to get where they need to go safely. And what we did to kind of help determine that is we labeled some key destinations, like places people like to go, places people need to go. So school, healthcare, employment centers, grocery stores. And people being able to get there within a low-stress bike ride in 15 minutes. Now, what's a low-stress bike ride? Some people will undertake any amount of stress on their bike. These are, typically what we like to call the spandex riders. They will ride with the cars under any conditions. But that's not really who this plan is built for. They benefit from the plan. But the plan is built so that moms feel safe letting their kids ride their bikes to school. That's the kind of level of stress and safety that we're trying to get under. So the plan will be successful. And its full realization will be when people on bikes or people who, have cars but are trying to replace 1 or 2 trips a week, when people can, just ride that little 2-mile bike ride to the grocery store because they forgot milk instead of getting in their car. When we've absolutely eliminated traffic fatalities and accidents, specifically for cyclists, but for all road users. That's really going to be the full explanation of it. But yeah, people have asked me a few times, how do you know when this plan will be successful? And I've always said when we have more kids riding their bikes to school, because if moms feel safe to let their kids ride their bike to school and lock up their bikes there, that means that we've really hit like a level of road stress that's so low and a level of safety that's so high that most other users could use it.
Right.
And you've published a pretty comprehensive interactive map online showing where the network would be. And from looking at it, it seems like many, if not most, of San Antonio's major arteries would include some form of bike infrastructure, right?
Yeah, so it's not just, just like when you drive around in your car, you typically don't have one route to get somewhere. So the plan is built with redundancy, and that redundancy is important. One, because we don't control every roadway in the city. We have partners that manage some of our roads, so we wanted to make it to where cyclists had connectivity and easy routes that didn't, turn them in loop-de-loops on their way to where they needed to go. But 2, in case of a weather event, we know some of our roadways flood. We know we have, some roadways under construction. So even if similar to, your car ride here today, you had different options to get here, cyclists have also different options to get to their destinations. Now,
my understanding is that federal funding would be a big component of this, right?
It could be.
How, we're at the very beginning of a Trump administration. You know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Among other things, just looking at Trump's, he wasn't particularly, in his first administration, wasn't really friendly to bike infrastructure. Generally, he also tried to get cities to, when they would receive transportation grants, to bump the city match or the local match from 20% to 50%. I think you can probably expect that kind of effort again. Beyond that, if you look at Project 2025, which is this kind of private think tank blueprint for federal government that the Trump administration actually seems to be following, it is not. It is a low priority for transportation policy. Do you think the federal government is going to care at all about this plan?
I think that we can tell the story of San Antonio in such a way that we can still secure federal funds. We've been successful through multiple administrations in securing funds for bike and pedestrian projects. So I'm hopeful we can continue to do that in the future. But I do think that there's a lot locally within our control that we can influence to still make a significant impact on safety here.
Such as?
Such as our local budget, such as bond. We have state programs that we can use. We have partnerships with, TxDOT and other authorities nearby. So I still think we can make a significant impact in the few years, even if all of the federal funding were to go away. But like I said, we've been successful in securing big grants through previous administrations. So hopefully our track record will continue into the future.
How about Bexar County? How significant are they going to be as a partner?
Yeah, Bexar County was involved throughout our entire process. They were a part of our Technical Advisory Commission. The county engineer for Bexar County actually used to essentially work in our department for the city. So we have a great partnership with, it works out really well. That connection kind of works out. Okay. Hi, Art. If you're watching, hi, Art. And he's just been a great partner through all of this. So the goal is for cyclists to not realize that they're changing jurisdictions when they're on the road. The cyclists, I think someone on council or mayor says this all the time, they don't care what sign is there, they don't care who's managing the construction, they care that it's an inconvenience on their way, or they care that it's a great facility. So working with county and also working with like the smaller municipalities in San Antonio, the Leon Valleys, the Alamo Heights has been fantastic. They've been a part of this the whole time so that there isn't, a stark change of, I hit a county line, or I'm in Leon Valley now, or I'm in Olmos Park now, and all of a sudden I don't have a safe route. Right. So they've been great in that as well. The map does include recommendations for their areas as well that they did sign off on and were part of the process. So we're excited for people to be able to get around pretty smoothly.
So after council approved it, what kind of conversations are you having now? And do you have an idea of what the first projects might be?
The first projects have already happened. The first projects are already happening. We did not stop bike work at all when we were doing this plan. There were things that were in the 2011 plan that we were like, this is still going to be relevant, so let's make sure we keep that going. There are some other projects as well, some other conversations. Immediately what happened after council was not a break whatsoever. We went straight into discussion about how we're going to implement these policies or what kind of deeper dives we need from them based on feedback that we received at council. We have a policy recommendations document that includes everything from, should we require helmets to Idaho stops were a popular discussion, which was fun. That's cyclists using stop signs as a yield as opposed to a full stop sign. That was a popular discussion.
That's called an Idaho stop?
It's called an Idaho stop.
Why?
Because Idaho allowed it. That's why. Yeah. Okay. Because Idaho allowed it.
Sometimes it's just as simple as that.
Easy. Yeah. So those are things that we discussed early. Policy we can kind of do in tandem. We've also done some studies ahead of time for bike projects that we think are going to be a bigger lift for consideration for this upcoming bond. So those have kind of been rolling. But we do have a list of what we've been calling like the low-hanging fruit projects, and it's a handful of intersections that if we make improvements at this intersection, all of a sudden we have like miles and miles of connectivity and safety, or, a few hundred feet downtown where there's a gap in bike facilities like on Camden. And if we make that connection, then we have, facilities straight from north to south through downtown. So there are some smaller projects that we're working on, and we're kind of lining things up for those bigger projects as well.
So just to get some idea of how it works, because we've had, as I'm sure you're aware, a number of very large plans in San Antonio that have gone nowhere. That have, they were passed to great fanfare at city council, and you just never heard a word about them afterwards. What is the city doing specifically to ensure that doesn't happen here? I understand this will be part of like bond planning. You'll kind of embed, it sounds like, you'll embed this policy in planning for road bonds. But what else? How does the city, not let this collect dust?
Yeah, so the bike plan is actually part of the reason it took so long is not only working with the community, doing that engagement, but working internally to make sure that implementation of this plan is just kind of a part of how we do business at the city. So that's working with public works, planning, parks, and then also a lot with the development services department. There's a lot of this that's going to get done with private development, and that's happening now with the 2011 bike plan. So the update to the 2025 bike plan, feels weird calling it the 2025 bike plan because we started it in 2020. In the 2025 bike plan, the new bike plan.
You just call it Project 2025.
No, we're not calling it that. Implementation of that is just kind of going to be part of the way that we do business when, when Public Works goes in to make improvements to any road, even if it's just like regular striping maintenance, they're looking to see is a bike plan for this road. Can we just stripe it now? If we can, that automatically decreases the cost because we're not going in by itself. When you're just looking at things like that, when you're just restriping and it's just a difference of add a bike lane here, that extra paint fee is nominal. So that automatically knocks down that 3 to 8 billion number. Our working with DSD has really been very important. We also do have a list of recommended UDC, the Unified Development Code amendments, that the next code update cycle will be looking at implementing. So it's not just the adoption of a plan, it's like a change in the way fundamentally that the city operates and that the city asks, private developers to operate as well. We did include private developers throughout the development of the plan, and we had a great time with them and got some great feedback. So we're really excited to see what some of them do in the future. But I mean, even before then, how the department was built with this kind of bike plan in mind. So the transportation department is not part of Public Works. It's its own separate department made from Public Works and planning professionals. And the goal of this department was to implement Vision Zero and kind of work on that project and own that. But also knowing this department needs to own bikes and bike safety and the bike plan. So the city kind of had the foresight a few years ago of we need to make sure that there's ownership and direction here. So we're also just set up logistically to be able to implement this better.
How important is having a champion on city council to kind of implementing this plan? Do you need a mayor to kind of be beating the drum for this, city council member? Because it doesn't look like you've had that. Not really. So
I would kind of disagree with that. If you kind of listened to council last week, it's kind of been hard to identify
how about before last week?
Oh no, there's been support the entire time. We've had council members that we've briefed constantly through this, that bring this to their constituents, that ask us to come out to their neighborhoods. We've had a lot of council support. It would be really difficult to single out, a single champion leading it. I mean, we have a council member that didn't have a driver's license until a few years ago, so this is their life. We have council members.
Who is that?
Who was that? Was it Terry? Terry Castillo.
Oh, right. She mentioned that.
Yeah, Terry Castillo didn't have a driver's license until a few years ago, so she knows what it was like to get around on her bike all the time. Cabello Harvada also relied on a bike for transportation, so I think we're very fortunate that a lot of people on the dais, this was just how they got around and how they lived their lives. So they're like, yeah, duh. Like, this is just kind of what we need to do. People recognize that this is how, or they recognize this is how people in their districts get around. And a lot of them ride bikes for recreation. The mayor rides bike for recreation. Manny Pelaez rides his bike for fun and recreation. So we've had a lot of support throughout the entire planning process, not just at the end for adoption. They came out to a lot of our events. They rode bikes. They hung out with us. They invited us to their events. So we've had a really good time and a lot of support from the highest levels of the city leadership.
I think a question that a lot of people who live in San Antonio would have is just how will this affect the roads that I drive on regularly? Could you describe how you decide exactly what form of bike infrastructure a certain road would get?
Yeah, so the kind of key components of that is the first thing we need to do is, a very rudimentary traffic study. So how many cars are on this road and how fast are they going? That's kind of the very basis. If we have, very low car usage and very low speeds, there's potentially less bike infrastructure we could need. We could have bike share a lane with just some traffic calming to ensure that there's slow moving vehicles. When we get into like these 6-lane roadways with, vehicles going 40, 50, even if the posted speed limit is 40 and vehicles are actually going 50, that's when we realize that we need to have something protected. That's when cyclists actually need to be separated from motorists. And there's a few different ways to do that. That's when you start looking at right-of-way. So how much space do we actually have? And land use. Is this a road that people are just using to get from point A to point B? Or is this a road that people are stopping frequently on? Is there shopping? Is there schools? Kind of what area are we in? So if you look at the design guidance as part of the bike plan, it really is kind of like a 4-step process of looking at speeds, volume, land use, and then you have options of what is safe, and then we explicitly say what is not safe and what is not an acceptable thing. So if that ends up being your only option, we need to look at rerouting. And then also talking with the community and saying, does that actually reflect their needs? Is that how they feel? Is that something that would impact them as well? So it's really a collaborative effort.
And from reading the plan, I mean, there are some forms of infrastructure in there that would be new to San Antonio, right? Could you describe different intersections and different ways of integrating the bike lane with the road?
Yeah, I think our intersection treatments and the proposed intersection treatments in the plan are kind of the most innovative in what we have. It was really funny in going through this. We were trying to develop a standard intersection. There's no standard intersection in San Antonio. It was ridiculous. Okay, we were like, okay, yeah.
I could have told you.
What's the most generic thing you can do? Didn't matter. It just it did not apply to a single intersection. So we have recommended treatments for intersections, for mid-block crossings, similar to you would have for pedestrians. The key in some of these areas is we know that intersections are when bike facilities fail, especially when cyclists need to turn left, when motorists are moving quickly. So things like 2-stage turn boxes can be helpful. Things like bike signals that we have a few of around San Antonio, but people probably wouldn't recognize unless they were on their bike. And then also mid-block crossings with separate facilities for cyclists and pedestrians to avoid those conflicts as well are some things that we don't have widespread throughout the city, but we do have recommended in the plan, and we see these kind of infrastructure installments in cities that have safer, more connected, well-used networks as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any cities that you're looking toward as a model?
It depends on what we're looking for. So there are a lot of cities that we kind of like took inspiration for. We obviously looked at Austin. We looked in Phoenix. We looked at some of our sister cities abroad as well. We looked in areas we hear a lot about. People won't bike because of the weather. So then we looked at, extremely hot places as well that have great bike infrastructure and extremely cold places as well. Some of the best bike connectivities in Alaska. And it's very well used. Also in Denver, people bike all winter long. Same in El Paso and Phoenix and Tucson, great bike facilities that people use in the heat of the summer. So yeah, we did a lot of looking around to see, a lot of cities get one thing right really well, kind of like we have our great trail system. Austin has their great street system. Some states have great policies. So we did try to kind of get a good look at the ecosystem and pick the best of the best for San Antonio. There's also just national guidance. We didn't have to come up with this by ourselves. There's documents and organizations that do this research and do all this looking for us and say, yes, this is the best, this is the safest for people.
Now, my understanding is on, I believe it's Market Street in Commerce. So the city's going to add bike lanes to about a 1 mile stretch of those two streets. When does that start, and what does that entail?
I can't tell you much about the timeline on that. That is one of our projects that our partners in Public Works are going to work on. I think that is a grant-funded project, but the goal there is to have a protected one-way bike facility on each of those roadways so that we have good bike east-west connection across downtown.
Is that removing any traffic lanes to accomplish that? Okay. Now, the city added bike lanes to South Flores, just off of downtown. And it didn't work out very well. There was a lot of complaints from area residents, and the city basically walked that back. What happened? I mean, what was the circumstance there, and was there anything that traffic planners with the city took from that? Yeah. So what did the city learn from that experience?
Yeah. So I don't think anyone on that team from that project is still involved in the bike planning now, but it is something that we've heard a lot when people are like, you're never going to get this passed. What about South Flores? And I'm like, what about it?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I bring it up. It was a touchstone, but I mean, what happened on South Flores?
I think it was really just a lack of understanding and a lack of community engagement and just really collaboration at that time. I do think the kind of culture and
how long ago are we talking about?
I couldn't tell you.
2011?
Or
maybe 2013 or thereabouts.
I couldn't tell you. But I do think if you kind of look at how San Antonio is grown, that the culture and the demand for safety has grown a lot over the past few, I would say decades, but also just years. There's a real understanding of like, we do have a choice in how we get around. And just because I get around on a bike or a walk, I do deserve safety as well. And I think that's an understanding that has been more recent. I also think the way that we engage the community has changed a lot. So that when we install these projects, there is more of an understanding of, we're not just putting this in front of your business for fun. It's for safety. It's for connectivity. This will get used and things like that. So I'm hopeful to have some more of that collaboration in the future.
So the city was just new at this kind of thing, basically. Sounds like maybe that was a problem. Okay. All right. One more question. I'm going to give it to Richard, and then we will tie it up.
Another thing significant that has happened recently is that I think it was Councilwoman Gavito filed the motion for one of the suggested policy changes to lower the default speed limit. Could you just explain why is that desirable for cyclists, and how would that impact area roads?
Yeah, so the CCR, the council consideration request that the District 7 Councilwoman filed is to lower the default speed limit throughout San Antonio. That's something that we call the prima facie speed. So it's, if you don't see a speed limit sign, this is the speed you walk, go. And that's important to cyclists because we know in the case of a crash, the speed and the size of the vehicle greatly determines outcome. So the smaller the vehicle, the slower the vehicle's going, the higher likelihood that you walk away without injury. But as our vehicles are becoming larger and heavier, it doesn't take that much speed to cause a significant injury for a cyclist, for a pedestrian, for someone in a wheelchair, for a kid crossing a crosswalk to school. So lowering and enforcing that lower speed really just improves the outcome of crashes. Because it's not a question of if there's going to be a crash, it's when and where. It's going to happen. They happen every day in San Antonio. That is something that the state of Texas has pushed back against a few times, lowering the speed limits. There's a lot of concerns from rural communities because there is a cost associated with that. There's enforcement, there's signage, and that is very expensive. So the city can move forward to lower that, but it is likely, as in the past, that it will get challenged by the state.
Is any calls to change that in the current legislative session?
Not that I've seen yet.
Now, I know I said I was going to give Richard the last question, but so Governor Abbott is kind of famously not, he's when the city tried to turn Lower Broadway, which is a state highway, to everybody's surprise. I mean, I think a lot of people outside of City Hall just thought it was
my favorite highway.
Right. That's right. It's all of our favorite highways. The city had passed a major bond project to turn it into a complete street with protected bike lanes. And Governor Abbott stepped in and say, not on our state highway. And the project kind of went by the wayside. Given what we know about his, the state government's acceptance of protected bike lanes in cities, is there going to be much help from the State Department of Transportation?
Yeah, there are some state grants that we're still very competitive for and that are specifically set aside for vulnerable road users, so for bikes and pedestrians. So there are some state grants that we're still very well qualified for. We've set up the bike plan in a way to have redundancy and connectivity just on city streets because we know that that's really all that we can control. So yeah, we're confident moving forward that we can still get those state grant applications and give cyclists, a smooth and connected ride just on what the city owns. Everything else is kind of just the cherry on top.
Great. All right. Harley Hubbard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you coming by.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. By the way, if you have not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, drop to the show notes, click it, and sign up. And thank you very much. We'll see you next week.